Will they close this thing out tomorrow night and get this thing over with and move on to round number 2, which I would assume would start, depending on what happens in that Toronto series, probably Saturday?
I think, is it this Saturday?
Well, Game 7 was supposed to be Saturday if it goes that far.
So maybe it's early next week.
I would imagine they want to try to get those games on Saturday, though.
True.
Don't you think?
Yeah,
They both are available.
Right.
Game 6 is scheduled for Thursday night. Game 7 is scheduled for Saturday. I don't know, when's that Raptors game? They play the Magic. They're like not on the same nights as the Sixers. So they're off a night. Right?
That game, is that game Wednesday?
They play tomorrow. Raptors in Orlando. So they both could finish up tomorrow.
Okay.
So they potentially could play Thursday or Saturday if they both end up winning the series. All right, Michael Kaskey-Blomain covers the 76ers, 97.3 ESPN.com. See a lot of his stuff at CBSSports.com as well on the NBA. He joins us now here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline to talk some Sixers and the Nets. Do you feel like the Sixers have this in control, or, do you think the Nets have some fight left in them?
I think the Nets have some fight left in them, but I think the Sixers are, they're with a 3-1 lead. I think they feel pretty confident coming back home that they should be able to take care of business. I think it'll be, it's not going to be a cakewalk. You're not going to see the Nets, just roll over. But, if anything was going to happen, I thought that last game, Game 4, was really a swing game. If the Nets had been able to pull that out and make the series 2-2 coming back, we could have seen it going deeper. But to, end up losing that game, go down 3-1, coming back to Philly, I like the Sixers' chances.
So in the game on Saturday, what was the difference maker for you, Michael? Why are the Sixers up 3-1?
Obviously a multitude of reasons. Having Joel back and playing pretty well for a guy that had missed the past game and a couple of days of practice, obviously didn't hurt. He played really well. And then guys of this, ever since the first game, we've just seen guys, really do what they were brought here to do and step up. Obviously, Jimmy had his game in Game 1, and then Ben, the past 2-3 games, we've seen Tobias Harris really carve out some nice games for himself, make himself, real useful on both ends of the ball out there. So I think we're really just seeing the talent kind of live up to its potential, the past 3 games that we didn't see in Game 1.
Michael, you also look at, the fact of the matter is Joel Embiid is the difference maker here, and obviously he's got the flagrant situation now. If he gets another one, he could be in, he could be suspended. I mean, the last portion of, that second half of that game, I should really say, shows the importance, because there's a lot of people that, hey, he wasn't in that game. Maybe they should just not play without him. But you could make the argument that if he doesn't play the way he does on Saturday, this series could be tied 2-2.
Yeah, absolutely, Mike. He was huge down the stretch, as we've come to expect him to be, especially, obviously we know what he does offensively, but just watching the team, it's really night and day on the defensive end when he's in there to protect the rim. He alters, basically every shot of all the guards coming into the paint. They, you can see them think twice when they're going to the rim. Makes it, they either have to take reverses or end up kicking it out for, shots on the perimeter. He's just such a big factor on the defensive end. It's, such a luxury for the Sixers to have, especially against a team like the Nets where, they've had some trouble, defending at the perimeter, staying in front of some of their quicker guards. So, the game where, obviously they were able to win, but you would see, some of the guys just getting baskets right at the rim, offensive rebounds, when Greg Monroe was in there. So Joel, on top of being able to, basically do everything offensively, run the offense through him, I thought he did a good job in that last game, too, of not even looking for himself, but getting shots for, some of the perimeter players from the post when he was doubled or they were showing 2 on him. He did a good job of swinging it. So, he really was a difference maker in that game. And against a team like the Nets, the Sixers could probably get away with, winning this series or winning a game like they did in Game 3 without Joel. But against some of these top-tier teams, Joel's really the difference maker for the team, for sure.
MKB, Embiid after the game, he talked about Butler coming to his defense, and he brought up Mike Scott. He said, Mike has kind of been doing that all season. I'm sure if he was on the court and then someone pushed me, he would have had my back. He's been tenacious and great with that all year long. What has Mike Scott's role meant to this team's identity? I've asked you about the identity throughout the entire season. And Mike Scott, listen, he knocks down shots, he plays good defense, but his toughness and how he just carries himself, I feel like has changed this team and made them more confident, and there's a swagger to the team, really because of Mike Scott and obviously Jimmy Butler, too.
Yeah, Ryan, I definitely agree with you. It's one of those things. It's like not necessarily tangible. You could look at any given stat sheet, and Mike's numbers might not necessarily jump out at you. But just having a reliable guy to come off the bench and give you some floor spacing and some toughness on the defensive end, I think has been huge for the Sixers, and it's something that they didn't have necessarily, earlier until they acquired him. And then, like you said, Mike, he kind of has like a swagger about him, like a confidence and a little bit of an arrogance. And he has his guys back. There's multiple times this year in a similar situation where, some of the other guys got into a scuffle. I think the Marcus Smart and Joel situation, Mike was right there. And he's just, ready to have his guys back. And I think that gives, the guys a lot of confidence, and it inspires kind of a unity among the group. And especially come postseason time, guys like Mike and Jimmy, those, the hard-nosed guys that aren't necessarily going to back down, that are going to, stick up for their teammates. And also the fact that they've been around a little bit. Those are the type of guys that you really want to have. I think that's one thing the Sixers didn't necessarily have last year in the playoffs. They had, a lot of talent, and they had some veterans that could shoot, but none of those guys that were really, kind of respected, like hard-nosed guys like Mike and Jimmy. So I think that's given the Sixers, a little bit of edge. And I think you used a good word, being swagger, that, maybe they were kind of lacking maybe last year that they have this year, thanks to, largely to those two guys.
The Sixers have been able to make it work with Embiid as far as, is he going to play? Is he not going to play? Game time decision. He's out there shooting. You don't know. I mean, every game, at least from our perspective, we don't know if he's going to play. The Sixers have been able to overcome that. But just looking ahead a little bit, is this going to be the case now for the rest of the playoffs? Are we done with that? And if it is the case, is it going to be more of a challenge against a team like Toronto?
Yeah, definitely, Ryan. I think it's, an issue in, past this series, potentially past even these playoffs, like moving forward, depending on, he has to figure out the root of this issue. And you see, at this point, it's kind of him managing his pain, and that's what's determining, if he's able to get out there and how much he's able to get out there. He's obviously not, he's on a minute restriction. He's not playing as much as he was in the regular season. And he's clearly not, I would say he's in bad shape, certainly, but he doesn't look like he's in, the best shape that he's been in throughout, his time with the Sixers, due to the fact that he's been in and out of the lineup and hasn't been able to. When he's not playing games, it's not like he's going, really hard in these practices, because obviously he wants to, take care of the knee as much as possible. But in the short term, I think it's definitely a concern. I think it's a disadvantage for, while it may be a disadvantage for the other team, not necessarily to know what the Sixers are going to do. It also works against the Sixers, because Brett basically has to, prepare for both situations. Is he going to have Joel? Is he not going to have Joel? And it's such a different dynamic when he's in and out of the lineup. It's not a guy like, JJ or, even Tobias or Jimmy to a lesser extent, where you could, plug in someone from the bench and keep basically the same type of style of play going. When Joel's in there compared to when he's not, so different. The offenses, ran through Joel to a big extent. You play a little faster when he's off the floor. More of it flows through Ben. You see more of Ben in the post when Joel's out. So it's basically a completely different game plan. And for Brett to have to kind of juggle that and not just be able to prepare, full steam ahead on one scheme, knowing that his best player is going to be out there, I think it's definitely a disadvantage. So at this point, it's tough to say that it's not going to be something that keeps popping up throughout the playoffs. I don't think that, it's going to necessarily disappear, or, the knee issue is not going to go away. So it might be something that they have to deal with, moving forward, at least for the rest of this postseason.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain covers the 76ers, 97.3 ESPN.com. Michael, when Joel's out there, obviously huge impact, but it changes the impact of Ben Simmons. Do you like the dynamic of those two guys together, or do you still think that's something that needs more work?
I mean, it definitely needs more work, Mike, but I really do like the dynamic. I think they, genuinely enjoy playing with each other, and I think they genuinely know that, they can bring the best out of each other. It's certainly a clunky fit still. It's, pretty easy to pinpoint the fact that, Ben's inability to space the floor, the fact that he's more comfortable being in the post, obviously that's, a redundancy between the two players. But given that it's Ben's second year, Joel's, second and a half or third, if you want to count the first season that he played, there's so much positivity between the two of them and things that they can do. They have great chemistry on the floor together. So I do think that it's going to be a work in progress. It's not like they're, a perfect couple on the court, but I do think that there's way more to be optimistic about in terms of their fit rather than to be, pessimistic about.
MKB, what has this team shown you or proven to you or something that you've learned through 4 playoff games with the Brooklyn Nets, if anything?
I think they just responded to adversity pretty well, individually and as a team. Obviously, I think that first game was a wake-up call. And, a team that's not necessarily mentally strong could have went a different way. A player that's not necessarily confident or mentally strong like Ben Simmons after he kind of had that backlash of the boos and how he responded to it immediately after the game, rather than letting that kind of bog him down mentally or the team itself, let that first game 1 performance kind of, define them or the series. They bounced back, really well, obviously won the next 3, played well. In the last game that got really chippy, I thought, obviously they lost Jimmy. They were away. It was a game that they were losing most of the game. They already had a 2-1 lead. They were coming back to Philly technically. Like if they wanted to write that one off mentally, they probably could have justified it. But, they went the other way. They fought hard even without Jimmy. Guys stepped up and they ended up pulling out a gritty win. So I think that, on a small scale, it's obviously only the first round and it's only the Brooklyn Nets. But I think we've seen, at least a little bit of mental fortitude from the team, which is obviously a huge part of success in the playoffs. So that's probably a good sign and probably the main takeaway for me so far.
I want to project a little bit more with you because Mike and I were talking about it earlier, but J.J. Redick, when you look at his liability on the defensive end, potentially against Toronto, and then Boban, who is everyone's favorite player, has played very well, in my opinion, in this series so far when he's come in, big shots, efficient. But where do those 2 players fall as they hopefully continue to go on in the playoffs, particularly after they close out tomorrow? How is Boban and JJ's role going to change, if at all, against a team that's a little bit deeper with a little bit more talent?
Yeah, that's a great question, Ryan, and that's going to go a long way toward, I think, defining how that series goes. And that, some of that's obviously going to fall on Brett to, figure out how to best use these guys. I think there's definitely certain situations where, they could obviously both be used. The Raptors got, I think Marc Gasol, when he's in there, when he's playing, I think Boban could match up with him decently in certain situations. JJ, technically, I think, he could match up with maybe Van Vliet when he's in there, maybe Danny Green in certain situations. So I think it's going to be, a situation where Brett has to maybe be a little bit quicker with the trigger in terms of subs than he is sometimes when, if there's a mismatch that the Raptors are taking advantage of. I think you'll probably see a lot of situations where maybe Mike Scott is in there instead of JJ, and just in terms of, he's not as good of a shooter as JJ, but he brings that, he spaces the floor for you, and he's certainly more versatile on the defensive end. So I think there'll be, some situations where he's used. And, the big man rotation in general, Boban obviously, but the whole rotation after Joel, especially considering, if Joel's knee injury is lingering, that's something that Brett has to figure out because, obviously the Sixers pulled that game out on Saturday. But the first half, Brett went through 5 big guys in a span of 5 minutes. None of them looked particularly comfortable. Jonah Bolden got exposed really bad defensively. Same with Greg Monroe. Boban was having kind of an off game. He was getting diced up in the pick and roll. So I think once Brett kind of settled down in the second half, cut the lineup down, started using Mike and even Ben in a couple situations as the backup 5 to Joel, the team played better. So, things like that, quick adjustments are going to have to be, pretty crucial in that series against a team like the Raptors if the Sixers want to have a chance.
Hey, Michael, I know the coach gets a lot of grief But has he done anything? Has he changed anything? Is there an adjustment or something that's different? Or do you think his team has just raised their level of play?
I mean, there's definitely been some adjustments. We've seen him, take TJ basically completely out of the rotation when, Jimmy's available. We've seen him, either turn to Jimmy or even Tobias in situations to run that backup point guard unit, which I think has been huge because it, obviously puts a better scorer and a better defender to run with the second unit, so you don't see the drop off, as significantly. I think that's been big. I think he obviously, he's put Ben in some situations in transition and things like that. But overall, it's been, as Brett would say himself, it's been basically the same schemes. I think the players have been shooting better. Ben being really aggressive compared to game one has certainly helped because when he's in attack mode, it just generates more open looks for guys all around. So, there's been definitely small tweaks. I think he's done a good job of assessing things. But overall, it's not like he's made any, I don't think any sweeping adjustments to really change things.
Yeah, and I know I saw what you talked about there when Butler went out. That's the first time we saw McConnell. But I thought that was a big change in the game, that momentum there and that play with Dudley getting ejected and then Butler. I thought really Embiid took that, and really elevated his game up. I mean, you could make an argument that play there, even though they lost Butler, really elevated them.
Yeah, definitely. And it was almost one of those things that you could potentially see that happening in the moment. We've seen, Joel in the past when he gets challenged in, situations like that. And that was a situation where he didn't even think that he fouled, Jared Allen in any sort of flagrant manner. And then he got pushed in the back and didn't retaliate. So you kind of knew that he was going to want to come out and, just make a statement with his play on the court. And it kind of, like you said, Mike, it kind of helped propel the Sixers into, ultimately being able to pull that game out. And that kind of went to what I was just talking about with Ryan, too. It kind of went to their kind of the mental toughness that they've been displaying throughout the series, instead of letting, losing a clutch starter like Jimmy affect them negatively. The guys kind of, banded together, led by Joel and Ben, too, who played really good defense down the stretch. And they ended up pulling out the win.
MKB, what are your thoughts on the team that the Sixers often get compared to in a good way, bad way, indifferent, the Boston Celtics, who have had a roller coaster ride of a season, and they come out and sweep the Indiana Pacers? I know they don't have Victor Oladipo, but once again, projecting a little bit, just curious what your thoughts are on their play as a team, because it is the Pacers, but they looked pretty good in that series.
Yeah, that's a good point, Ryan. They did look pretty good, and I thought the Celtics looked, obviously like really solid. They have a lot of guys that were contributing. It was hard for me to read too much into it. I watched that series closely. I watched all four games, and the Pacers kept it competitive. But once it got down to the fourth quarter, the Celtics have guys to turn to, mainly Kyrie and Al Horford, that have the experience and, the ability, where the Pacers just really struggled to generate offense down the stretch to put up points that, other teams in the East will be able to do, whether that be, Milwaukee for them in the next round or then, the Sixers or Raptors, whatever team it may be. I thought there was times that the Pacers should have won a couple games in that series. In my mind, I thought they, defensively played well enough too. They were right in, a couple of those games right till the end. They literally threw, I think it was game two. They basically literally threw it away with a meltdown in the last 90 seconds. So I mean, I didn't think the Celtics played that well against the team that didn't even have an all-star. I thought they looked pretty good, but for me, I think there's definitely some questions. They didn't hit any adversity in that series. It was almost like they were kind of going against a practice team that kept it real close against them for three quarters, and then they were able to pull away. I'll be interested to see against, next round against Milwaukee, if they, come out and lose game one or game two and fall down in a hole, how they respond, because they just didn't hit that, in that first round, and that was something that they struggled with throughout the course of the regular season. So they definitely look good, but I'm not ready to say that they look as good as people predicted them to be before the season.
Michael Kaskey-Blomain covers the 76ers, 97.3 ESPN.com. If there's a question that you still need to have answered by this Sixers bunch in this series, what is it?
More so just I want to see the rotation really get to a point where where Brett feels where he's comfortable with it, with or without Joel in there. I thought that the first half of the last game was really messy. Joel was again a game time decision, so he started. But once after Joel went out with early in the game, it was kind of a really rough first half. I think once Brett kind of settled down and got the rotation.
What do you do in that situation? I mean, he said he was going to start Monroe. Now, Monroe was a punching bag on social media the other night, which I don't know what you want him to do. I mean, he doesn't want to start Boban because his minutes are so limited. You saw Bolden is not ready. Monroe, it's funny. He plays the 2 games against the Heat and the Bulls, and he looks pretty good, and people are like, oh, maybe they got something here. And the guy grabs 13 boards and has 9 points, and people are killing this guy. But it's like, what should Brett do in that? Who does he play? He can't play Boban 38 minutes.
No, it's just more so fundamentally, Mike. You know me, I'm a big Brett Brown guy. I'm not trying to give him too much trouble, but it's just, in the second half, he decided that he could commit to small ball. First of all, they had 5 centers active against the team that had 1 active center. In the second half, he went to Mike Scott a lot at the 5. He went to Ben at the 5. And that's when you see them starting to pull away. In the first half, it just seemed like he literally was just flipping through a center like a deck of cards. He's like, all right, you go out for 2 minutes. You played bad. Come out. You go out. And he already knows what he's going to get from these guys. It's not like, Jonah Bolden obviously, or all of a sudden is going to turn into Draymond on the defensive end, or Greg Monroe is going to drop 10 pounds and gain lateral quickness. Like, he knows what he's going to get.
Gain
so
lateral.
I just want him, whatever it is, like whatever he thinks is going to give him the advantage, just game plan it and stick to it, rather like he did in the second half, rather than fluctuate so much with the lineup. Because I think the further you get in the playoffs, the less time you have to afford to give minutes to guys that are going to be negatively contributing.
Yeah, no, and look, I'm just saying, like, I don't know, like, that's a good point. Maybe he just says we're not going to go with any of these centers. We're just going to go with Mike Scott and go with that lineup, as opposed to saying we have to start one of these centers.
Right, and just at least to get the matchup like this, that works. If it's the next round, if it's the other way, go the other way and say, all right, Joel's our starter. If he's out, we're going to go with Boban. If he's out, we're going to go with this, and that's what we're going to go with, rather than – I mean, obviously you need to adjust in terms of the game as things happen, but in terms of the game plan, I just feel like it could be a little bit more tight in the front court than it's been so far.
Now, we don't want to jump too far ahead.
Let's do it.
But if the Sixers play the Raptors in the next round, which looks likely right now, J.J. Redick, what happens in that situation? Do the Raptors have a guy to hide him on?
It's going to have to be situational. They do, in certain situations. I think in the starting lineup, they were going to try to hide him on Kyle Lowry. Size-wise and speed-wise, that's probably the best bet. He's, I think we all know Kyle has a history of not being great in the postseason. I think that's something they'll try to do. Second unit guys, maybe Jody Meeks, maybe Fred VanVleet, similar guys that aren't barn burners in terms of speed. But it's going to be one of those things, like I said a little while ago, I think Brett's going to have a little bit quicker of a draw, with the substitution than he sometimes tends to in terms of matchups in this series, especially with JJ. If he's getting targeted, if they're consistently putting him in pick and rolls and he's matched up on, Kawhi or Pascal or something like that and getting exposed, he has to, quickly go to Mike or James Ennis or somebody else.
All right, Sixers, Nets tomorrow night, 97.3 ESPN. McGinnis has the call, 8 o'clock, right here on 97.3 ESPN. You're home for Sixers playoff basketball. And, of course, if they win tomorrow night, they will clinch the series and move on to take on, most likely, the Toronto Raptors. And you can hear that all right here on 97.3 ESPN. All right, MKB, we will see you tomorrow.
All right, Mike. See you tomorrow. Have a good one, man.
At The Real Mike KB on Twitter. Give him a follow. Does a great job on the Sixers and the NBA.